All right, strap in, everybody. We're going deep on this one. We're diving into Odessa, Texas. They just passed this new city ordinance about, restroom use in public buildings. And it's causing quite a stir, to say the least. We've got the actual ordinance right here in front of us. And let me tell you, it's a bit of a legal jungle. One thing that really jumped out at me, though, this private right of action clause. Basically, it lets any person, just a regular citizen, sue someone if they think that person is violating this restroom rule. Yeah, you heard that right, anyone.
It's a really interesting case, isn't it? The way they try to use legal language in this ordinance to try and tackle this much broader social issue. It's about way more than just, restrooms. It gets to the heart of how we as a society view and define gender.
Okay, yeah, let's break this down a bit. So the ordinance, it states that its purpose is to ensure privacy, safety, and decency. In public restrooms, locker rooms, those sorts of places. Sounds pretty standard at first glance, wouldn't you say?
It does. But I think we need to look beyond those kind of general statements and think about where this actually applies. We're talking community centers, libraries, airports, places we all use pretty regularly, right? And they lay out some really specific definitions, particularly for restroom and biological sex. I mean, they really went all out defining everything. Toilets, urinals, changing rooms, showers, you name it.
Wow, so they're not messing around. But what exactly do they mean by biological sex then?
That's really the key issue here, isn't it? The ordinance very clearly states that it's determined by what's on your birth certificate. It's a very traditional, very binary definition of sex. There's really no room for the complexities of gender identity, those that we're increasingly recognizing in society.
So, hold on. Are you saying that if someone identifies as transgender, but their birth certificate doesn't reflect that, they could be forced to use a restroom that doesn't align with their gender identity? I mean, that seems, kind of problematic to me.
It is. It raises some serious concerns about potential discrimination and the impact this could have on the daily lives of transgender people in Odessa.
Okay, so let's say someone breaks this rule. What are the consequences? Like, what if you accidentally walk into the wrong restroom?
Well, the ordinance lays out some pretty specific penalties. Violating it is a Class C misdemeanor, which, could mean a fine of up to $500. They could even hit you with trespassing charges.
Oh, wow. Okay, so there's some real consequences there. But let's circle back to this private right of action thing for a second. It sounds like, something out of a dystopian novel. Anyone can just sue anyone else just because they think they might be breaking this restroom rule.
That's how it reads, yes. And it gets even more interesting. Let's say you're at the library, right? And you see someone walk into a restroom. And you believe that it doesn't align with what you think should be on their birth certificate. Even if there's no harm done, even if no violation actually happened, you could still sue that person.
You're telling me I could sue someone just for using the bathroom? That seems, extreme is probably an understatement.
And the potential damages are pretty substantial. You could seek an injunction to stop them from using the restroom, but you could also sue for monetary damages, including a minimum of $10,000 per violation.
$10,000 just for using the wrong restroom.
It's a significant amount, yes, and it definitely creates this chilling effect. People might start, scrutinizing each other more, questioning their neighbors, maybe even reporting them. It could lead to a culture of fear and suspicion, especially for transgender individuals who are, let's face it, already more vulnerable to harassment.
Wait, so it gets even worse. I thought we were already, at peak crazy.
Well, think about the defenses you might think you have in a situation like that. Like, I didn't know, or this law is unconstitutional.
Yeah, that kind of common sense stuff.
Well, the ordinance actually explicitly excludes those defenses. It's designed to be very, very difficult to challenge, even if you have, legitimate legal grounds.
This is just mind-blowing. So we've got this very rigid definition of biological sex, strict rules about which restroom you can use, harsh penalties for breaking those rules, and then this private right of action. That basically deputizes, everyday citizens to become enforcers. I mean, what were they thinking?
It's certainly a potent combination, and I think it reflects a particular worldview, one that sees gender in very, very black and white terms. But as we'll see, this ordinance is kind of, entering this legal and social landscape that's far more complex than that.
So where do we even go from here? I mean, this whole thing just seems like a legal minefield. But Odessa's not, operating in a vacuum, are they? There've got to be some legal precedents out there that could be used to challenge this ordinance.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't, the first time a law like this has popped up or even been, enacted. There's a long history of legal battles over transgender rights, especially when it comes to public accommodations.
So there's a kind of a roadmap then.
Yeah.
For how to challenge this kind of legislation.
There is, but it's complicated. It's a constantly evolving landscape, We've seen cases where courts have upheld laws, the ones that restrict restroom access based on biological sex. They cite privacy and safety concerns, that kind of thing. But we've also seen cases where courts have struck down similar laws, finding them discriminatory and, in violation of equal protection principles.
So it's a bit of a legal tug of war then, with different interpretations and different outcomes, depending on the court and the specifics of each case.
Exactly. A lot of the legal arguments really come down to this balance between individual rights and government interests. You see, opponents of these laws, they argue that they're discriminatory against transgender individuals, forcing them to use restrooms that don't align with their gender identity. And that could potentially expose them to, harassment and emotional distress.
Okay, so what about the supporters of these laws then? What are their main arguments?
Their focus tends to be on privacy and safety, especially for, women and children. They argue that allowing transgender individuals to use restrooms that correspond to their gender identity could, create opportunities for predatory behavior.
So it's kind of a clash of values then, and different perceptions about risk.
You could say that, yes. And the courts, they have to weigh these competing interests and decide if the government's reasons for these laws are strong enough to outweigh the potential harm to transgender individuals.
This is heavy stuff, but it's more than just a legal issue though, right? This feels like part of a much bigger discussion about gender identity and transgender rights in general.
Absolutely. I mean, this ordinance is like a microcosm of this larger societal debate we're having about how we understand and define gender and whether our existing legal systems are really equipped to handle the complexities of gender identity.
As we're talking about all of this, I keep thinking about the real world impact on Odessa. This ordinance, it could have like a ripple effect that goes way beyond just the legal stuff.
That's a really important point. Odessa's not just facing a legal challenge here. They're looking at a potential social and economic reckoning.
You mean like boycotts and protests?
Potentially, yes. There's a real risk of backlash. Businesses might think twice about moving to a city that's seen as, discriminatory. Big events might avoid Odessa. They don't want the bad press. And tourism could definitely take a hit.
But it's not just about the economic impact, right? It's about the message this sends, about the kind of community Odessa wants to be. This ordinance, it could make some people feel unwelcome or like they're not valued.
Precisely. And that message can have, pretty long-lasting consequences. It might discourage talented people from moving to Odessa, especially people in the LGBTQ plus community. Yeah. It could create this climate of fear and division, which would make it harder to attract investment and to build a thriving economy.
So this isn't just about, restrooms. It's about the soul of Odessa, the kind of place it wants to be in the 21st century.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's a real crossroads for them. The decisions they make now, they'll have ripple effects for years to come.
Okay, so, wow, we've covered a lot here. We went through the legal language of this ordinance. We talked about the potential legal challenges, and we looked at the broader societal and economic implications. It's a lot to process.
It is. But it's crucial to remember one thing. This isn't just some abstract legal debate. There are real people in Odessa whose lives are going to be directly affected by this ordinance. Transgender individuals who, just want to live their lives with dignity and respect.
That's right. This isn't just a theoretical exercise. We're talking about real people, real families whose lives are going to be impacted by this legislation.
And we need to think about the consequences for them, both in terms of their personal safety and their sense of, belonging in their community.
It's true. It's easy to get lost in the legal weeds of it all. But you're right. We have to remember the human side of all of this. For someone living in Odessa, especially if they're transgender, this can't just feel like some, abstract legal argument. This is their reality.
Yeah, and it's important to remember, too, these issues, they don't just sit still. What looks like settled law today, it could all change tomorrow. The whole legal landscape around transgender rights, it's constantly evolving. Really hard to say for sure what the future holds.
So what advice would you give to someone in Odessa who's, trying to make sense of all this, what are some key takeaways?
Well, I think the most important thing is to stay informed, to stay engaged. Don't avoid these difficult conversations. You know what I mean? This ordinance, it brings up some really fundamental questions about individual rights, about societal values, about how we want to build our communities. It's not about, choosing sides. It's about understanding all the nuances, considering different perspectives, and then, coming to your own conclusions based on evidence, on critical thinking.
So basically, do your homework, talk to people,
Yeah.
and don't be afraid to question your own assumptions.
That's it. And remember too, real change. It rarely happens overnight. It's usually a slow process. It can be messy. There are setbacks, but every conversation, every legal challenge, every act of advocacy, it all adds up. It can all contribute to a more just and equitable society. This ordinance, it's really just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
That's a good point. This isn't just about Odessa. It reflects this national conversation we're having about transgender rights. We're seeing these same debates happening all over the country.
That's true. And while this specific ordinance focuses on restrooms, the core issues, they go much deeper, right? It's about recognition. It's about inclusion. It's about the right to live authentically.
I keep thinking back to something you said earlier about how this ordinance uses this really strict binary definition of sex. Is that even, I don't know, sustainable in the long run, especially as we're becoming more aware of the spectrum of gender identity?
That's a huge question. And it's one I think we all need to really wrestle with. What happens when we make laws that ignore the complexities of gender? What are the long-term consequences of that? Will these laws even hold up in court as our understanding of gender continues to evolve?
Yeah.
And maybe most importantly, what kind of society are we creating? One that's more inclusive or one that's more divided? These are questions we can't just brush aside.
Wow, you've really given us a lot to think about. We really went deep on this one. The legal ins and outs, the potential consequences, the whole social context of this ordinance. What a journey.
It has been, hasn't it? And it's a journey that's not over. But remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand these complex issues, the better we can engage in meaningful dialogue and advocate for a world that respects the dignity and rights of everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep asking those tough questions, and most importantly, keep the conversation going.